When Friday saw him, he started to cry. Then he laughed and hugged the man. Then he jumped and began dancing around him. He cried and laughed at the same time. When the strongest emotions were gone, Friday told me that the prisoner was his father. I felt tears in my eyes when I saw the son's love for his father. This happy incident delayed us, and the cannibals were already gone. Friday returned to the canoe and held his father's head to his chest. Then he rubbed his father's hands and feet with his hands to warm him up. Soon, Friday's father was feeling much better. When they talked, Friday suddenly jumped up and ran to the forest as fast as he could. When he came back, he had a bottle full of fresh water. He handed the bottle to his father, who was dying of thirst. After he drank and was feeling better, I asked Friday to give the rest of the water to the Spaniard, who needed water very much too. The Spaniard was very grateful to me, but he was so weak he couldn't get up on his feet. I asked Friday to rub his hands and feet just as he did to his father. It helped him a lot. Then I asked the Spaniard to go to the canoe with Friday's help because I wanted to take them to our place. Friday, however, being young and strong, just took the Spaniard on his back and carried him to the canoe. Then he carefully put him there and arranged it so that both he and his father were comfortable. Chapter 26. Dinner. When the Spaniard was inside the canoe, Friday jumped out of the canoe and guided it along the beach faster than I could walk. We soon reached the place where I saved Friday. Friday helped our new guests out of the canoe, but they weren't able to walk. We had to carry them to our home. We had another problem. When we reached the house, Friday's father and the Spaniard couldn't go over the fence or climb a ladder, and I didn't want to destroy the fence. I wanted to pull them over the fence, but then I realized the cannibals were already gone. We could stay outside the fence. We made a comfortable tent for them outside the fence and prepared soft beds for them too. As soon as we finished this, I started cooking dinner. Friday brought some fish, and we cooked them quickly. We all had dinner together in the tent. Friday was my interpreter because the Spaniard spoke the language of Friday's people. After that, I asked Friday to go back to the beach and bring us the weapons we left in our hurry. I also asked him to bury the bodies of the killed cannibals. The next day, he did as I said, so later when I went to the beach, I could hardly recognize the place. If it wasn't for the big tree behind which we were hidden, the next morning I asked Friday's father what he thought of the cannibals returning to kill us. He said our guns created a great shock. They didn't know how we won the battle using them. He said he heard them shout in their language that Friday and I were spirits sent from heaven to punish them with fire. I was still worried the cannibals might return with a bigger army, but nothing of the kind happened. When our guests were strong enough, I began to think about the journey by sea again. I asked the Spaniard about his arrival on these islands, and he said that he was on a Spanish ship going to Havana. There were 16 Europeans, Spanish and Portuguese, on Friday's home island. He told me that a storm broke the ship near my island. They saved themselves in a boat, and now they lived with Friday's people. I asked the Spanish whether they tried to make another sea journey. Of course, they wanted to go home, but he said that they had no tools with which to build another ship. I showed the Spaniard the tools I had from the ship. He said that with my tools, it was possible to build a ship. I thought the Spaniard and Friday's father could return to their island. They could tell other Europeans about the possibility of building a ship together. We could go to Brazil, Havana, or maybe Europe. However, the Spaniard suggested something else. He told me that it would be better to wait for at least half a year because there wasn't enough food for 16 more men on my island. We wouldn't have enough food to eat while building the ship, and much less to take with us for the long journey. The Spaniard advised me to plant more corn, and he and Friday's father helped us expand the fences and fields. We caught more goats and increased the number of goats to 50 animals. We collected a lot of fruit, then dried it. We started preparing the materials for the ship. We chose a few trees, and I showed them how to cut them to form long boards. In half a year, we had a lot of food. We had so much corn that we needed more baskets and pots to store it all. We saw that the Spaniard was very good at making baskets. He had a great talent. His baskets were excellent. He also used a special technique to make baskets. The technique was fast and effective. He made the baskets 3 times faster than I did. I asked him to teach me his skill. I wasn't as fast as him, but I was faster than before. Chapter 27. Englishmen. We put all the food in my cave. It was safe there. Then the Spaniard and Friday's father could go back. They could bring the other men here. We gave them food and 4 guns in case they were attacked again. Then they took the canoe and went away. 2 days passed since they left when something unexpected happened. I was woken up by Friday at about 6 o'clock in the morning. "Are they here?" I asked. Friday said, "Not yet, but somebody else is here." I saw a boat. I went to the top of the nearest hill. I saw the boat. It was clear that these people weren't the friends we expected. The boat came from a completely different direction. I could also see a ship. I knew this shape. The ship was English. I was confused. On one hand, I was happy to see Englishmen after 27 years on the island. On the other hand, I was concerned because the island was quite out of the way of any English ship. Recently, there had been no storms that could have taken them here. Perhaps they were pirates or murderers hiding here. All this made me very cautious. Friday and I remained hidden, observing them for a while. The boat approached the beach, and I counted 11 men. They were all Englishmen. 3 of the men had their hands tied together. The other 8 men took them to the beach. 2 prisoners were calm, but the 3rd prisoner tried to say something. He looked very scared and asked the men in the boat for something. On seeing this, Friday turned to me and told me that it seemed Englishmen were also eating people. I told him that they didn't have the slightest intention of eating them. Instead, I thought they were going to shoot them. After a while, I noticed this wasn't the case. The people from the boat went exploring the island while the 3 tied prisoners sat on the beach with 2 men as guards. They looked desperate. The situation made me think of my own arrival on the island. Just like those prisoners, I felt lost at first. Soon the tide was low and the boat they came with was stuck in the sand. They couldn't move it. So I heard them shout to each other that they would leave with the next tide. This gave me 10 hours. The night was approaching, so we would get an opportunity to go near them and overhear their conversations. Now I was sure they came here to leave those 3 men here as a punishment. Friday and I stayed hidden until dark. I noticed the men who stood guard were asleep, and the 3 prisoners were sitting under a tree quite close to us. It seemed to me they were also out of sight from the other sailors, so I could approach them without being seen. I went to them, with Friday following closely behind me. When we were very close to them, I spoke quietly to them. We were still hidden behind the trees, and they couldn't see us. When they heard my voice, they couldn't believe somebody spoke English to them from the dark forest. "What was that?" asked one of the men. "I heard something. I heard a tree speak," answered the other. "But it is impossible. A tree can't speak English." "Yes, you heard something, but it isn't a tree," I said quietly. "My name is Robinson Crusoe. I am an Englishman. I live on this island. I will help you if you tell me who you are." After the initial shock was over, one of them answered my questions. He was the captain of the ship, but some of the sailors started a mutiny. He, his assistant, and a passenger were taken prisoners. The other sailors were going to leave them on this island to starve to death. The captain told me that there were only 2 dangerous sailors who took control over the others in this group. If the leaders were captured, the rest would return under the command of the captain. Chapter 28. Control. I said, "I am willing to help you, but I have one condition. I want full control over the ship if we manage to get it back." The captain and the other 2 prisoners agreed, and they gave me full control over the ship and their lives. We freed the prisoners, then we went back to the forest. I gave them guns, and we started to plan the attack. In the middle of our conversation, we noticed that the sailors who stood guard were waking up. They stood up and shouted to 3 other men who were near them. At that moment, we shot the guards. Then the captain spoke to the 3 other men. He told them to be loyal to him and help him get back to the ship. They agreed, and we tied them and left them on the beach. The other 3 men who heard the shots came back. They could see the situation had changed. We were 5, and we had a lot of guns. The situation was bad for them. They also agreed to be loyal to the captain. We tied these men too. We hid our 6 prisoners in the forest. Then the captain and I finally had time to talk to each other. I told him my story, and he was shocked. He also thanked me a lot for my help. He and his 2 friends were hungry, so we went to my house where I showed them what I built for myself during my stay on the island. They were amazed by all the things I had. However, we didn't have much time to explore my inventions because we had to plan how to get the ship back. There were 16 people on board, and we were only 5. First, we decided to take everything out of the boat. We thought the sailors could send another boat to the island if the men from the first boat didn't come back with the next high tide. In the morning, we heard the ship fire a gun as a signal for the boat to return. After a while, the ship fired a few times again. There was no response. Then we noticed that the sailors took another boat and went to the beach. Through my telescope, I could see 8 men rowing, and they were all armed. We could observe the boat approach us, and the captain recognized the sailors. He knew that 6 of them were still faithful to him, but there was also the man who started the mutiny. The captain feared that the leader of the mutiny and the other men in the boat would be difficult to defeat. But I told him that we had a good chance of winning, but we had to act quickly. The captain trusted 2 of our prisoners. They promised to fight on our side. So we gave them weapons. Prepared this way, with 7 men ready to fight on our side, we expected the arrival of the boat. As soon as it reached the beach, the men jumped out of it and pulled it up the beach. Then they ran to the other boat and were surprised to see it empty. They tried to call their friends, they shouted their names, then shot in the air. But it was all useless because nobody shouted back. This surprised the newly arrived sailors even more, and they began putting the boat in the water again. It seemed they wanted to go back to the ship to inform the others that some accident happened with the sailors in the first boat. Observing all this, the captain got scared they would go back to the ship and leave the island altogether. Luckily, during a few seconds, the sailors dropped this idea. Now they left 3 men in the boat, and the others went to the forest to look for their friends. Chapter 29. Plan. We continued observing all actions of the 2 groups. The 5 men in the forest sat down under a tree. After a long consultation under the tree, they got up and walked towards the beach. They probably gave up looking for their friend, and we had to act quickly before they reached their boat. I had a plan. I told the assistant to go with Friday more to the center of the island and shout at the sailors. When the sailors heard this, they shouted back. Then they started going in the direction of the voice. Friday and the assistant continued shouting back. They started to take the sailors to the opposite side of the island. This strategy worked as I planned. The 5 men were. Soon, very far from the beach, this was very good for us. We went to the 3 men in the boat and explained the situation to them. They decided not to fight us. They became our prisoners, too. Meanwhile, Friday and the captain's assistant returned. They led the others so far away that they wouldn't return sooner than in 2 hours. We hid and waited for them. When they returned, they were very tired. When the sailors came to the boat, they were amazed to find it empty. They started calling their friends, but again there was no response. After a while, the leader of the mutiny and 2 others separated from the rest and walked towards the forest where we were hiding. The captain and Friday attacked them as soon as they were closer to us and away from the group. The leader was killed on the spot. A second man was injured, and the third one ran back. Then we all emerged from the forest and ran to the boat. The captain spoke to the sailors. He asked them to give up. When the sailors understood the situation, they dropped their weapons quickly. We decided to tie the prisoners, but we didn't tie all of them. The captain trusted 3 of the men, so we didn't tie these 3. Now we were 10 men and started to plan how to get the ship. After some discussion, we knew what to do. Friday and I stayed on the island. We had to watch the prisoners. The captain, his assistant, and the passenger took the clothes of some of the prisoners. They wanted to look like them. Then the captain and his sailors took the boat and went to the ship. When they were near the ship, they spoke to the men on board. They told them it wasn't possible to find the other men. When all of the men from the boat were on the ship, the captain showed himself, and the attack began. Several sailors were injured in the battle. There was only one person shot, and he was the second leader of the mutiny. As soon as the captain regained possession of the ship, he ordered 7 guns to be fired, which was the signal we agreed on. I was happy to hear those shots. Soon the captain went back to the island. We hugged each other. He told me that the ship was now under my control. I was so happy I started crying so much that I wasn't able to speak. After I calmed down a little, the captain ordered his men to bring a lot of food from the ship to the island. We were going to have a nice meal to celebrate our victory and my departure from the island. There was expensive wine, excellent tobacco, pork, beef, and peas. There were biscuits for dessert. I was very happy to taste all those things again. The captain gave me clean clothes. I hadn't worn clothes for a long time. The clothes were very light. They were a little uncomfortable at first, but it was soon fine. When the meal was over and I had clean clothes again, the captain and I had to discuss what to do with the 5 prisoners whom the captain didn't trust. The men were really horrible. He even feared taking them on board the ship in chains. I suggested discussing the matter with them and seeing if perhaps they would choose to stay on the island instead of going back to England, where they faced death for mutiny. We met the prisoners and explained the new situation to them. They had to choose between a death sentence in England and a life on the island, and they went for the second option. We put them in the cave. The cave was now the prison. I told them to wait for more orders. Chapter 30. Son. I needed some time to prepare for the journey. I had to think about what to take with me. In fact, I didn't need to take many things. I decided to take my dog, my parrot, my book, and some other small things. I also took the money, gold, and silver which I found in the ship. They were finally useful to me. I met with the prisoners one more time. I showed them my corn and my domestic animals and told them what I discovered and what I built on the island. Then I went on board the ship. We left the island on the 19th of December, 1686. It was 27 years, 2 months, and 19 days since I first stood on the island. First, we went to the island where Friday's people lived. The Spanish and Portuguese sailors were very happy when they saw us. They were happy that we had a ship. Now we didn't have to build a new one. We could go to Europe. My dog was very happy too. When he saw one of the Spanish sailors, he ran to him very quickly. He jumped on him and was extremely happy. The Spanish sailor was his owner. He was very happy too. He started crying when he saw his dog. It was a very emotional meeting. The sailor started to prepare for our journey across the ocean. Friday had to make a decision. He could stay with his people, or he could go to Europe with me. He needed some time to think about it. We stayed on the island one night. In the morning, I asked Friday if he made a decision. He told me that he wanted to go with me to Europe. He prepared everything for the journey. We were ready to go. We started our journey. 2 months later, after a safe journey across the ocean, I stepped on English soil again. 35 years passed since I left my homeland. It seemed to me the whole world had changed in that time. London was a different city. There were some new houses, streets, roads, shops, parks, and a big bridge across the river. But it wasn't all. People also changed. They had different clothes, women had different hairstyles, men had different hats, and new types of guns. People used new tools which I didn't see before. They had new names for these tools. It was all very interesting. The style of music in the pubs was also different. I heard new songs. I liked this new style. I wanted to sing these new songs. From London, I returned to my town, York. My parents were both dead. I found some relatives. My sister, my uncle, and my aunt were still alive. They were happy to see me, but they thought I was long dead, so I had no rights to the family's money or land. But I could stay and live in their house. England was a big shock to Friday. Everything was so new for him. He saw so many things for the first time in his life. It was all very interesting for him. He liked this new experience. What he didn't like was the cold weather in winter. It was February, snow, ice, and freezing temperatures weren't good for him. It didn't seem logical to him why we lived in such conditions. I told him that in summer the weather is much better. I sent a letter to Brazil. I still knew the address very well. I wanted to contact people in Brazil. I wanted to know if my wife was still alive. I wanted to know if my plantation still existed. But I didn't know what to expect. The connection was broken many years ago. In May, I got a letter and some packets from my wife. She wrote that she waited 10 years for me. Then she stopped believing I was alive. She married again and had a family, but her new husband died 2 years ago. I also got a letter from my wife's father. He took care of my plantation. In his letter, he wrote detailed calculations of the expenses and profit from the plantation during all these years. They both sent me many nice presents. They sent some nice skins and a little box full of gold. They also sent me some boxes of sugar to sell. My wife had a big surprise for me. She wrote that I had a son. It was great news. He was born 8 months after I left Brazil. He was now a big man, and he wanted to meet me. So many things happened to me in such a short time. It was shocking. I wanted to cry, then I wanted to laugh. All the emotions were too much for me. I wasn't able to calm down. I stood up, I sat down, I stood up again, I walked around the room. I laughed, then I cried again. When I calmed down a little, I started to think about what to do. Chapter 31. Brazil. I thought about moving back to Brazil. I wanted to see my son, my wife, and my plantation. After some longer thinking, I decided to go to Brazil, but only for a visit. I wanted to see if I could live there again. I wrote to my wife and asked her if it was okay to visit them for a few days. With the letter, I sent nice presents to her and her father's family. After some time, I got a letter from my wife. She wrote that I was welcome to visit them. Her invitation made me happy. I started to plan another journey by sea. I bought nice presents for them. 2 weeks later, I was ready to go. When we arrived in Brazil, I met with my wife and my son. She had changed a lot, but she was still very beautiful. My son was a big man now. He was very intelligent. He had his own family, too. He had a big responsibility. He managed the plantations of the whole family and was responsible for a big land. My son spoke only Portuguese and a little Spanish. My Portuguese wasn't very good. After so many years, I had forgotten many words. I remembered only some basic phrases, but with practice, I started to remember the words fast. After 2 weeks, I could have a basic conversation on many topics, and 1 month later I was able to speak fluently and automatically. I was very happy that I could speak with my wife and my son. We had so many things to talk about. Soon after arriving in Brazil, we had a big party. It was a celebration of my son's birthday and also my arrival in Brazil. Brazil also changed a lot. Many things were different from what I remembered. The plantations were much bigger. Many people worked on them. I was with my family for 3 months. I knew I wasn't very far from my island, and I started thinking about visiting it again. I wanted to see the island for a few days. Friday also wanted to see the island again, and my son wanted to go too. I thought it wasn't a good idea. I knew how dangerous the sea could be, but he wanted to see the place that he knew only from my stories. We planned our journey. 2 weeks later, we left Brazil. We went on a ship that was headed to Havana, and we had an agreement with the captain to stop at my island on the way there. When I arrived at my island, we met with Friday's people. They now lived on the island. I asked them what happened to the prisoners. Did you eat them? They told me they didn't eat Europeans. They ate only their enemies from other islands. They said that when they came to the island, the prisoners were dead. They probably killed each other. I wanted to stay on the island, and my son did too. I asked the captain if he could pick us up on the way back, and he agreed. I saw many children running around. It was interesting to see so many people on the island where I had lived alone for so many years. I saw that the people on the island were very happy. Friday was happy there too. He met a woman he liked very much. Friday asked me what I thought about his staying on the island. He knew that I saved his life in the past, and he didn't want to leave me without asking. I agreed. I saved him, but he didn't have to stay with me all his life. It was time for Friday to start his own family. I was happy he found a good woman, and I was happy when I saw they were in love. I respected Friday's decision to stay on the island with his woman. I walked around the island a lot. I wanted to visit all the places I knew from my life there. I had some favorite places, for example, the Fruit Valley. I spent a lot of time there. I like this place very much. My son liked the island too. He often walked around with me. I told him many other stories about my life here. We stayed on the island for 20 days. Then the ship from Havana came. It was time to leave. We said goodbye to Friday and his people. When we left the island, I had a strange feeling. I also felt tears in my eyes. I liked this place very much. It was my home for a long time. I thought I would never see this place again. I hope you have enjoyed the reading.